Hello everyone, Snickety here, and welcome back to more obscure PS2 games. The ones from the last episode were obscure, sure, but they were definitely the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to go a bit deeper than that for this one, so let's start with some stuff that was never even released outside of Japan. Gekibo 2, also known as Polaroid Pete. This is a sequel to an old PC Engine game that was never released outside of Japan. Technically, neither was this one either, yet we have this English translation of it. Is this some kind of fan translation? Well, actually no. The game was originally planned to be released in PAL territories by JVC, but their game publishing division went bust before that could happen. What we have here is an unreleased prototype that only found its way online fairly recently. I say prototype, but this is essentially the finished retail game and is most likely what would have been released back in the day. The new title reflects a licensing deal with Polaroid, whose logo appears on the cover and in the game itself. It's an arcade-style action game where we play as a cameraman named Pete, who is sent off to Japan by his chief to capture some strange and unusual scoops. Each stage auto-scrolls, and you only have a limited amount of control over your character. You can move back and forth a little, jump, and that's about it. What you'll mainly be doing is directing the camera and taking photos of anything and everything. These levels are packed full of weird and quirky sights, many of which are easy to miss. So you're encouraged to replay levels to get a higher score. The chief will tell you about an important event happening at each location that he wants you to capture for the front page scoop. This is worth the most points and is pretty much essential to meeting each stage's score quota. It's a very charming game. I especially love the demented looking design of the main character. There's something unnerving about how he slides into his boss's office like that. Ooh, on to the next game. The Maid Fuku to Kikanju, which translates to The Maid Clothes and Machine Gun. This is a simple 2000s release that never left Japan. You play as an android maid named Yuki who goes back in time to protect her future creator from a robot army. The story is entirely in Japanese, so a lot of the nuances are lost on me. But it sounds a lot like the Terminator, only with more maids. It's an action game where you have to kill all the enemies on screen to progress. Your main weapon is the titular machine gun, which has limited ammo and has to be manually reloaded when it runs empty. A strange game design choice, if I must say. There's a sword for melee attacks and pistols with unlimited ammo. However, to use the latter, you must fire immediately after evading an enemy. Not this evasion, mind you, the other one that's activated by pressing triangle. It doesn't do anything unless there's an attack to evade, so as long as you're mashing the triangle button, you can avoid everything. Unless you're playing on the harder game mode. There's also a sniper rifle and rocket launcher. These don't consume ammo, but instead a green SP gauge underneath your health bar. Your weapon loadout can be customized and upgraded, but it's very easy to miss this. In my playthrough, I never unlocked any new weapons, and I was only able to purchase a single upgrade for my machine gun in New Game Plus. That's right, I spent the entire game playing with the default weapons. From what I could discover, you only unlock new weapons from finishing certain missions with either an A or S rank. It's essential to rack up Maid style points, which you get by taunting the enemy with your Maid poses. Maid style! Only those who have mastered this game will have the luxury of changing their weapons. Aside from the main gameplay, there's also a sniping mission and this on rails section in the car, and that's basically it. There's only 8 missions in total, and you can easily beat the game in less than a couple hours. Once this is done, a harder mode is unlocked, which is manageable until you get to the genetically enhanced super soldier Laura, who is kind of like the arch nemesis to the main character, I think. She destroyed me in this mode every time I went up against her. Hard mode notwithstanding, this is a fairly easy game that doesn't overstay its welcome, and is pretty functional. It's light-hearted and fun with some nice character designs. I particularly like these character portraits during dialogue. Very expressive and cute. I was curious who did these designs, so I checked the credits. Apparently it was someone named Yuichi Katori, who I can't find any information on. But something else caught my eye in these credits. The producer is named Kenichi Sonoda. No, surely it can't be that Kenichi Sonoda. Then again, Girls with Guns does fit his MO.
Nomad to all units. You're going after the enemy fighters. Deploy and attack.
I'm back on my plane bullshit again. This is the third and final game in Konami's flight combat series, Airforce Delta, also known as Deadly Skies in Europe. Not to be confused with Lethal Skies, which was the English renaming of the Sidewinder series. Wait, what? Isn't that basically the same title? Not counting the Game Boy versions, the first game was exclusive to the Dreamcast, the second exclusive to the original Xbox, and this one was exclusive to the PS2. Not an easy series to follow back in the day, I'd imagine. Anyway, this is obviously Konami's answer to the Ace Combat series. It even follows the same evolution as the games went on. The first two games are set in a fictional setting resembling the real world, and are mainly concerned with pure gameplay. The third entry is a radical departure that takes the series into more sci-fi territory, and features a colourful cast of characters illustrated by the great Jun Tsukasa, known for his highly detailed character art, among other things. That's right, this is the Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere of the series, a game that I compared to the mecha genre back in my analysis video. Well, this game actually does feature mechs. It's a hard nosedive into the absurd, and I loved every minute of it. The story follows the Delta Squadron, a group of misfits who are often sent on seemingly impossible missions in a war against the OCC, a tyrannical government from outer space that may have ties to extraterrestrials. They have artificially enhanced super soldiers and other kinds of advanced technology that the Delta Squad has to go up against. It often feels like every mission in this game is trying to one-up both itself and the Ace Combat series. We have flying battleships, these big wheel fortresses, a canyon with giant fans, railguns, space elevators, the list goes on. Hell, one mission has you flying through the eye of a tornado to destroy their tornado-creating machine. It really is that bonkers of a game. There's an obscene amount of tunnel missions, probably to cater to people like me who have an unhealthy obsession with flying through tight spaces. But that's not all, because we also go into outer space. And unlike Ace Combat 3, it's for more than the one mission. The entire last third of the game is set there.
But what did you think you'd be riding out there?
Jets. Obviously.
So yeah, needless to say, this game is pretty awesome. But how does it play? I don't want to keep bringing up Ace Combat, but it really is unavoidable. It plays a lot like those games, only with slightly heavier plane physics and other minor quirks. However, it does have some of its own mechanics, such as multiple playable characters. Every character has their own set of exclusive aircraft fit for different purposes. The third element gets the well-balanced advanced fighters, the kind of stuff you'd expect really. The second element gets mainly attack aircraft, and the first is all over the place. Alex specialises in VTOL planes, and Jamie refuses to use anything other than shitty prop planes. He's an old man, set in his ways, and he doesn't trust those newfangled fighter jets. Some missions are exclusive to certain elements, while others let you choose from the entire cast. Using certain characters for certain missions can unlock secret planes and even hidden missions. A lot of the missions are optional and can be skipped entirely, while others are critical to the war effort and thereby mandatory. If you fail to complete these type of missions in time, then it's game over. And yes, there is some time management going on here. The game is divided up into phases and turns. Each phase is made up of 10 turns. A turn is used whenever you set off for a mission or return to base. You can be intercepted on your way over to a mission, which creates a bit of a dilemma. Since ammo and health are not replenished until you return to base, you must choose to either use a turn or continue on to your mission. Being shot down during a mission will also use up a turn. But honestly, none of this actually matters a whole lot. As long as you reload your save after getting shot down, you never have to worry about any of this, which makes me question why they implemented such a system to begin with. Getting shot down should just bring up the option to try again like in most games. But here you have to listen to the characters yell at you for wrecking the plane, reload your save, go through the mission briefing again, select your character, go through the world map, and then you can retry. It's quite a difficult game too, so it's a tedious process. In general, there are way too many menus in this game. It can be a difficult task just figuring out how to switch characters. You can only do it after a mission briefing for your information. It's overly complicated and lacking a lot of quality of life features. I also really wish you could follow enemies with the camera as well. But I guess Namco had the patent on that feature or something. It's the only reason I can think of why they wouldn't implement it. However, once you get good at this game, a lot of this stuff becomes a non-issue, which made New Game Plus a much more enjoyable experience. There's some stuff you just have to figure out by playing this game, such as whether you should use the novice or expert controls. Usually in these type of games, I set it to expert and never think about it ever again, but here you might want to consider switching to novice for an easier time. Some missions are extremely difficult with the expert controls, such as the one on screen right now, but are laughably easy with the novice controls. This applies to any mission where you need quick horizontal movement, such as the many tunnel runs you have to do. Unfortunately, this control scheme is unfit for dogfighting, or any mission where you have to do a lot of vertical climbing, since it locks up the controls and makes you a sitting duck. If you're playing this for the story, it's a fun time with a diverse selection of likeable characters, all of which stand out thanks to the fantastic character designs. The character depth isn't anything to write home about though. After a while, it did become tiring hearing the resident lolly officer Lilia condescend to the pilots, or hear John Rundle go on about hunter and prey for the millionth time.
As long as there's prey in my hunting grounds, there's only one thing for me to do. Hunt them to extinction.
Okay, whatever.
Speaking of which, the radio chatter in general can get a little grating. It certainly doesn't take after Race Combat 3 in this regard, and is mainly just a fun, mecha-anime-esque adventure. And you know what? I'm fine with that, because we'll never see a game like this ever again. It satisfies a strange niche that I don't think exists anymore. The military otaku who likes both planes and giant robots. Speaking of mecha, that leads us to our next game. Yet another untranslated entry to the PS2's massive library. This time it's a game based on the classic Gainax OVA Gunbuster, directed by the most misunderstood creator who ever lived, Hideaki Anno. It's a story of a girl leaving the Earth to fight space monsters in a giant mecha with her One-sama. It's absolutely fantastic and a true masterpiece in the genre. So how did they translate it to a game? With slavish devotion to the source material, from what I can tell. Some sources online tell me that this game tells its own story, but for the most part it's the events of the 6-episode OVA played out at a much slower pace. You begin at the girls' school, training in the RX-7s before setting off for space and boarding the space battleship Excellion, which is where most of the game takes place. There seems to be some sort of time management at work here. You can use your free time to do whatever you want. You can train to raise your stats, engage in mock battles, or just talk to characters and explore. Those last two sound useless, but they actually give you credits to purchase new special attacks. This is how much of the Gunbuster's huge arsenal of weapons is acquired. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. You have a lot of cutscenes and wandering around the ship until you even get to set foot in that behemoth. All of the voice actors from the original OVA return to reprise their roles. Something that goes without saying, really. Not having Noriko Hidaka's iconic screams would be tantamount to a crime against humanity. Unfortunately, I can't understand what she's saying, but I can feel her passion nevertheless. It breaks through the language barrier and instills in me a powerful energy. Sadly, the gameplay here sucks ass. There's an over-reliance on annoying and difficult quick-time events and missions where you have to defend the Excellion. You bring up a menu to execute special attacks, and their power is determined by how well you do at that bar on the bottom left. The lock-on system is also atrocious. As I mentioned, it takes a while to even get to the Gunbuster. Several hours of gameplay, in fact, and the build-up was simply not worth it at all. Avoid this game and stick to the OVA. Let's continue the trend of untranslated mecha games based on classic 80s anime. It's Armored Trooper VOTOMs, the story of an elite soldier named Kiriko Kuve who is desperately trying to survive in a world where seemingly everyone wants him dead. Here he is in this uncanny valley CGI recreation of the anime's opening, looking a lot like Nero from Devil May Cry. But the actual in-game graphics look a lot more accurate to the show. They're very impressive too. Anyway, this one is a lot better than Gunbuster, at least as far as gameplay is concerned. It's actually a pretty good example of a game accurately translating an anime to a game. Everything here from the show is faithfully recreated. The mechas move and sound how they should, with some silky smooth animations and fluid gameplay. VOTOMs was always more of a hard sci-fi take on the mecha genre, even in comparison to other real robot shows such as the original Mobile Suit Gundam. The mechas themselves were nothing more than disposable tools, a means to an end, if you will. Even the series' famous Scope Dog design has no grander purpose in the story. It was simply a mass-produced piece of cannon fodder, and Kiriko would run through a ton of them over the course of the series. This is represented in the game. If your mech is destroyed, you can eject and continue on foot. You may even find a replacement. As long as Kiriko survives, it's not game over, at least in some missions. Sometimes you'll lock to whatever AT you choose at the start. I do think the game goes a little too far in places at replicating the clunky realism of the show. You can actually smash into walls in a comical fashion and get staggered, which can be a death sentence in some missions. I do seem to remember this developer making a similar design choice in another anime game I reviewed. Staggering in general is what makes the gameplay here extremely frustrating, especially when you're fighting one of the many boss battles against Ypsilon. All of these battles boil down to keeping him out of range at all costs, because he will stagger and kill you before you know it. Even certain ground troops can stagger you as well, which just feels extra insulting. Sometimes too much realism isn't a good thing. Overall, not bad at all, but the flaws do become apparent in the more difficult story missions. The game adapts the entire 52-episode run of the original show, and even some of the OVA material. It also comes with a versus mode with 2-player support. This is where the gameplay shines, I'd imagine. The mechanics are great, but the story missions can sometimes feel like an afterthought. It also doesn't help that it forces you to complete a certain percentage of free missions before you can move on to the next story mission. These can vary wildly in quality. At any rate, check it out if you want some silky smooth Scope Dog action. Good god, the FMVs sound awful in this game. Our final game for this video is Maken Shao Demon Sword, an enhanced port of the Dreamcast game Maken X that changes the first-person view to third, among other things. I haven't played the original version, but that does sound like an improvement. It's one of the few non-JRPG titles developed by Atlus, who are mostly known for the Megami Tensei series, which you know I'm a big fan of if you've been following this channel. This particular version of the game was only released in Japan and Europe. What's this? We got an Atlus game the USA didn't? What sorcery is this? That's unheard of. It's all thanks to Midas Entertainment, who published quite a few PS2 oddities over here, like the train game and BCV from the last episode. This game had all the best talent at Atlus working on it. Kazuma Kaneko on the art direction, Koji Okada as the producer, Shoji Meguro doing the music, and Katsura Hashino as the director. Even though it's not officially part of the Megami Tensei series, it does share some of the same themes and ideas. It's about a teenage girl named Kei Sagami who is forced to merge with an artificial being known as Maken, or whatever the player decides to name it, in order to save her father and the entire world. It takes the shape of a sword and is able to manipulate the image world, which is a realm comprised of people's souls. It's also able to shift its image into other people and brainjack them, giving it access to the host body's memories and abilities. This makes it the only thing capable of stopping the evil god that seeks to control humanity's hearts and minds, Mr. Meteor. He has 8 generals that occupy powerful positions in the world's governments and criminal underworld. These are called the Haki, and they're opposed by the Fukenshi, an ancient clan that is sworn to protect humanity from Mr. Meteor's control. Which side of the conflict Maken takes is ultimately determined by the player's decisions. In any case, it's a globe-trotting adventure for a dark world teetering on the edge of destruction. It's a hack-and-slash title that at first doesn't look like much. Many of the stages have pretty bland and uninteresting designs. The gameplay can also come across as very slow and clunky at first, but make no mistake, this game is a lot better than those initial impressions would lead you to believe. Instead of slow and clunky, it's precise and deliberate, and those bland levels are filled with very interesting enemy encounters. The European Union enemies are just straight up Nazis. Based. As mentioned, you can brainjack different characters to play as, and all of them have their own set of attacks and abilities. Some of them are more suited for different tasks than others, and some characters are needed for accessing certain stages. It's important to get to know their animations, how fast they are, what their attack range is, and so on. It's not an aggressive style of gameplay at all. It's all about getting to know your enemies and striking while the iron's hot. If you get too greedy, be prepared to be punished hard. It's almost, dare I say, Dark Souls-esque. Yeah, I know that's an extremely cliché comparison, but it really is the best way I can describe it in this day and age. And just like in those games, the boss fights are the main attraction. Kaneko's talent at crafting twisted and otherworldly abominations is on full display here. Every single one is a memorable encounter. It's classic boss design, really. It can take a few tries until you figure out the right strategy for beating them. The difficulty can be brutal, and in some instances a little unfair, but it knows how to pull its punches. It's more of a fair challenge than an exercise in masochism. For example, there are always save points outside of boss rooms, but not always healing items, so you need to be careful. Each character you brainjack has something called a domination percentage. This increases the more you defeat enemies with them and allows them to learn their full moveset. Once a character reaches 100%, they'll get a massive stat boost. But this can take a while to achieve, a lot of grinding in fact. And because of this, I was a little reluctant to play around with the other characters. Each of them costs image points to brainjack, which you get from defeating enemies, more so when not taking damage. But on my first playthrough, I mainly just used the character you get right at the beginning, Li Fei Chan. She's so good, there was little reason to switch characters. and once you get her to 100%, it's a tough sell moving on to someone else who starts weaker. There are some very good characters if you do care to experiment though, such as Rumrod, who is a slow, physical powerhouse. Plus, the range of his sword allows you to hit back projectiles without exposing yourself to danger, something that is very useful against certain enemies. You're able to take control of all of the Fukenshi and Haki you come across, and all of them have their own little stories and worldviews. Depending on your interactions with them, the main heroine Kei will have something different to say. She's an idealistic teenage girl who only really cares about saving her father. But she isn't the one in control, Maken is, and the player is Maken. So they can choose to help Kei out or pursue their own agenda. They can help the Fukenshi, side with Mr. Meteor, or choose their own path. A world of chaos with unlimited potential. It's easy to see the resemblance to the Shin Megami Tensei series in this regard, specifically in how the story branches depending on your alignment. However, in this game, not all routes are created equally. Unlike SMT, the alignments aren't as morally ambiguous. You're most likely going to side with the Fukenshi and save Kei on your first playthrough, because it's obviously the right thing to do. Siding with Mr. Meteor is something you'd only do just to see what happens, but it is pretty interesting just straight up being the villain for a change. On this route, you fight the Fukenshi instead of the Haki and go against humanity. Kei's reaction to this can be downright heartbreaking. This is the route that truly emphasizes Kei's naivete. She's a much needed dose of innocence in this game's cruel world, which is what made me appreciate her role in the narrative. Plus, she has one of my favourite Kaneko protagonist designs. The simple colours make it very striking indeed. It's a Japanese school uniform, but it looks a lot like a Chinese dress, which ties heavily into the game's use of Chinese mythology and Taoist motifs. The story here isn't the best, but it presents a lot of interesting and cool ideas with a solid execution, which is more than I can say for some of Atlus's more recent efforts. SMT5. This is without a doubt the best game in this video, so I'd recommend checking it out, especially if you like Atlus stuff. By the way, don't play the emulated PS3 version. I've been Snickety Slice, I'll see you around.